for freedom together. Thank you very much.
Thank you for invitation and this initiative to become true. Ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor for me to present Bulgaria. I'm a medical doctor. My name is Dr. Georgi Todorov, and I'm a physician, one of many activists in Bulgaria who exposed this plan of pandemic. I gladly accept the invitation of my fellow citizens to participate, and I believe that we're going to make true successfully. But what I want to say is that I have to remind you the doctors who have participated very much, and I have to remind you that there is no regime holds in power without the help of medical doctor societies in the countries. Pinochet had them in his side and stood over 18 years. You shouldn't remember. We shouldn't forget. Many people have been reassured and believe that everything is behind us. It's undelusive, fake reception. I want to remind how everything has started. Until the late 1990s, WHO achieved successes. I said this because me, myself, participated in projects in Republic of Ghana many times for many years. My personal encounter with the organization convinced me that it is undergoing a transformation of turning from a health-focused entity into something else that does not prioritize public health care anymore. I have to tell you that our society, if we think deeply, is guided by definitions. And those who have the power to change these definitions, their meanings are the ones who actually govern it. The WHO has appropriated the right to change the definition of epidemic, vaccines, etc., but not in the name of science, rather to fulfill the orders given by sponsors. We shouldn't forget that 84% of total revenue exceeding $3.6 million come from top 10 top donors are 72%. Let's see what they change. They easily remove words enormous numbers of deaths from the definition, replace it with public health emergency international concerns. An extraordinary event is determined to constitute a public health risk to other states through international spread of disease and potentially requires coordinated international response. This slight change took the pandemic from the medical field and turned it into a political act. They tried to do so in 2009, declared pandemic as swine flu. The governments were pushed and squeezed to make extra budget expenses, later turned the expenses in vain, and the purchased medicines became trash. Failing then, the next attempt to volatile public health emergency of international concern declared in January 2010 turned to be COVID epidemic only 41 days later. This act as the biggest achievement of the purposes of WHO. And they untied the hands of governments to restrict us in many ways, wearing masks, mandatory contract restrictions, limitation of public places, lockdowns, etc. And the doctors, most of the doctors helped them and help. The beneficiaries of this change were vaccine manufacturers, government that gained more power over citizens, and the right to spend money in shadow environment to the benefit of entities with endless greed. So, changing the definitions, the same happened in the United States with the vaccines. And the words, the vaccines protects a person from the disease was vanished. This came after the fact clearly showed that substances declared as vaccines, never checked properly against COVID, do not actually protect people from getting sick. So the picture of coordination for changing of the definitions was painted completely. The temporary needed instruments were sharpened, and the results of usage are well known. The previous speakers gave a detailed picture of the upcoming treaty, but foremost mentioned pandemic agreement finally aims to become a system for completely electronic control of people in all WHO members under the fragile guise of healthcare. The WHO recently declined anticipation for new pandemics in advance. They are acting as predictors of last instance, when the disastrous level of the competence of their officers is obvious. Is it really need we to sign anything? I don't think so. For a better understanding, it should be emphasized once again that fear will always be the first choice for the WHO and its associated health authorities in different countries, because it is the only way to ensure that at least the majority of citizens will play along. It is time for countries to leave this organization, whose true aim is to trample of our human rights and freedoms. We in Bulgaria did the first step towards our exit from WHO. Bulgaria is the only country in the world where an organization called Bulgarian Alliance for Decent Life organized official nationwide signature action, support the exit of Republic of Bulgaria from WHO and for withdrawal from all agreements. We took over 30,000 signatures for only 16 working days and officially led Bulgarian National Assembly to undertake political action as the law says. Discussion and mandatory vote. Police officers and Bulgarian prosecutors were not eager to work for repression in Bulgaria from the first day of the pandemic, rather supported silently and sometimes publicly as in their majority. This actually turned Bulgaria to be the island of freedom and peaceful resistance. We minimized the fate of mainstream media. The humiliation from the official government forces was minimal or none. We made them useless for the goals of WHO, especially the Ministry of Health. We humiliated them, put them in humiliation in front of society, and their sponsors thus led to the deterioration of the reputation of WHO, European Medical Agency, because we exposed the results of the vaccines publicly, and unfortunately, the European Commission, because of the obvious but even disastrous results. I have to tell you that without freedom, there is no health. And this is my first word, become something like narrative in Bulgaria. Our new citizens initiative should mark the beginning of the end of WHO and similar to them, organizations with their attempts to regulate and rule our lives. And finally, achieve views of truth, trust and freedom in the society. Thank you very much for your attention.
So now we come to the last part, to the debate, where we have some international speakers, and I have the privilege to start with this last round. And again, I can't thank enough to the members of parliament who have made it possible for this presentation to take place, to this debate to take place, but who have also consistently, during the last 2.5, 3 years, hold up freedom and the fundamental rights and brought it all the time back into the debate of parliament and insisted that these questions were brought to the parliament. And so really thank you very much. And this is exactly the topic we are addressing here today, and also the response to the question why I personally support this European Citizens Initiative, being a Swiss citizen not being allowed to participate directly, but now I'm going to tell you why I do all I can to support this initiative. And there's a clear, simple answer. I would like to start with the words from Professor Matthias Desmet. He concluded by saying, it is so important that we speak out as long as we can still speak out, to encourage others to join us, and as well then to ultimately make others to join us as well. Now, here comes the democratic element into this arena. And this is all about informed consent, informed dissent. If we speak about fundamental changes in our constitution, fundamental changes that are relevant for our lives, then these changes on the perspective of a constitution shall never come into place and into effect with our consent. The procedure how this is going to be done is defined by each constitution. And taking now the wider look at WHO, I had the pleasure to present the changes a couple of times, but it took me maybe 10 presentations to realize how to really explain well and understand what is going on here. And I think it can be brought down in a simple manner. WHO is going to establish a classical totalitarian structure and wants to make sure that the value of the national constitutions become zero. And if you analyze well these international health regulations, you will find 5 elements that show that very clear. Number 1, there's a mechanism of self-empowerment that already exists today, but which will be enlarged to a horrible extent. It will be even more simple than until today for one person, the general director, to declare a public health emergency of international concern. I spare you with the details, but he can simply just say the word into the microphone. Second element, all what WHO will publish under the title of recommendations will become mandatory. I gladly stay at disposal to any media to prove that. There are still today many officials who say the opposite, who say, no, this will just be recommendations, not mandatory. That's not true. They will become mandatory. Number 3, fundamental rights. With such a regime where you have one person declaring emergency law, having all the power to make recommendations that are legally binding, you don't have to even discuss about human fundamental rights. And whether they are now still crossed out in Article 3 or whether they might put it back into, it will not change the result. There will be no effective protection on the country level for fundamental human rights. Number 4 is specifically frightening because as human beings and trying to pursue the ideals of the Enlightenment, as very well explained by Matthias Desmet, we depend on the right information. Now, in both of these instruments, in the new pandemic treaty and in the amended health regulations, we have both provisions that clearly say WHO shall be the only sole institution on the planet that will be allowed to define what is the truth in health matters, including censorship. And the 5th point is that there's no mechanism of correction. There's no mechanism of control vis-à-vis WHO that could correct any wrong recommendation or a wrongly declared public health emergency of international concern. No, they can just go on forever and forever. And all of this, of course, we know, it is done in the interest not of our health, but in the interest of those sponsors who define the true strategy behind it. Now, it doesn't take a study of law to come to the conclusion that this will heavily affect and reduce the ordinary structure of our constitutions actually to a minimum. There will be no separations of powers. There will be no checks and balances. This principle of the rule of law will be as abolished and replaced by the rule of emergencies. And most notably, there will be no human rights. Now, this is so powerful, and we have seen that this message has not come across to the public. And there has literally non-debate taking place in any parliament with very few exceptions. And I shall mention one exception, is Andrew Bridgen, member of British Parliament, who rightfully persisted and insisted in bringing this topic to the floor of the House in the British Parliament. And he succeeded, and I'm honored that he is here with us today, Andrew Bridgen. And so does also Gerald Hauser. He did the same. He made the case in the Austrian Parliament that WHO's power structure should be made a topic of discussion. Now, I come to the point, it is all about how can we engage the parliaments? How can we engage the public? And this initiative of today is a very, very valid tool of starting public awareness and starting public debate in an international level, on an international stage, and then continue with informing people. Because I am sure about one thing, many people slept in the past, but if the same people would understand what is coming to them in the future, they would have an informed dissent. They would be horrified and would certainly not agree into this permanent power structure of WHO, Gavi, and of course also the European Commission is the little junior partner of WHO, is doing the same. So let's continue by informing our fellow citizens. And here I wanted to thank you again to the 7 European citizens that initiated this European Citizens Initiative, because I think it is a very powerful tool to initiate a public debate and to bring this where it has to be discussed to our parliaments. Thank you very much. And
oh, there we go. Can everyone hear me? Sorry about that. Hopefully, technologically, all being well, we have a message from someone that you probably all know. So on the screen, joining us from the USA, we have Dr. Peter McCullough.
Practicing internist, cardiologist, and a research epidemiologist in Dallas, Texas, United States. I want to thank the members of the European Parliament for attending and hearing the concerns of the European Citizens Initiative. This group has come together because of concerns in Europe, those traveling to and from Europe and worldwide, regarding the World Health Organization Pandemic Treaty Alliance and all of its efforts to gain greater control, and actually its aspiration of having dominion over all plants, animals, and humans in the world. The last 3 years, we've seen the COVID-19 pandemic disaster be far worsened by WHO actions. The World Health Organization was grossly unprepared. They intentionally deceived the world regarding the origins of SARS-CoV-2 from the Wuhan Institute of Virology, a project that was engineered by U.S. researchers, Ralph Barrick and his associates at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, Peter Daszak at the EcoHealth Alliance, and then, of course, the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Do you know that the WHO declined 3 independent U.S. scientists nominated by Rear Admiral Brett Giroir and chose Peter Daszak in 2020 to actually aid in the cover-up of the Wuhan lab as opposed to getting an independent evaluation back in 2020? The World Health Organization is simply not the organization that we want having any influence over our healthcare, over our animals or plants or our livestock. The WHO, as it exists, should only provide data analysis, in vitro diagnostics, and outbreak investigation, and provide reports to us. The WHO serves us, those of us who are member nations. But under no circumstance can the WHO seize more power, binding by international law, than ultimately carry out what would probably be a series of disastrous public health interventions, and particularly if we have another pandemic. If we have another pandemic, we want to focus on independent scientists aiding their governments, focusing on early treatment, and under no circumstances should anyone wait in lockdown and wait for a vaccine. The COVID-19 vaccine campaign has been a worldwide debacle. It's been grossly unsafe, completely ineffective, and we certainly don't want a repeat of that at the hands of the WHO. So please listen to the European Citizens Initiative, ECI. I'm in complete support, and I want to thank you for your diligence and your ability to sort through all this. This has been a difficult time for all of us, but hold strong, seek truth, and be bold and relentless in bringing the European Union and the world back to its senses, getting back to normal, and allowing everyone to pursue their goals of life, liberty, and happiness. I'm Dr. Peter McCullough from the United States, internist, cardiologist, and trained epidemiologist. Thank you for listening.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have been very lucky. We had some great speakers at this event so far, and to have Dr. Peter McCullough from the United States. He has been an absolute Trojan for the cause over the last few years, and he's been attacked in the media relentlessly. Like many of us, he's still standing, and he will be on the right side of history, as will you, I promise you. Now, let's correct a couple of things. I have had some brilliant briefings on the WHO from Philip. I think 2 of them in Norway, which was excellent. And yes, I would love to claim all the credit for the debate we had in our Parliament on the WHO pandemic treaty, but that would not be right. We have a quirk in the UK Parliament, the mother of all parliaments, that if 100,000 of our electors write in with a petition for a particular debate, then the government is duty bound to put on that debate. I'm pleased to say that we managed to achieve a petition total of 156,000 electors for the WHO debate, and so we had that debate, much to the government's chagrin. And of course, they said that there would be no handing over of sovereignty, there would be no giving away of powers, and we wouldn't be agreeing to any of this. Well, unfortunately, governments, as we know, do not always tell the truth. Ladies and gentlemen, some 7 years ago, I didn't think I'd be sitting here. I was leading the Leave campaign for the East Midlands to leave the European Union. And as you know, we were successful. However, I am delighted. I'm delighted to be back here. With my European friends, standing shoulder to shoulder on an issue of the most importance in our lives and those of our children. So I didn't expect to be here, but I think we can all say that over the last 3 years, a lot of things have happened in our lives that we didn't expect to happen. So desperate times lead to desperate measures. And the main point I want to make in my address to you today in the time that I've got available is that, and I want you to hear loud and clear, that the very concept of the democracy that we've taken for granted all of our lives is under threat as it never has been before. And it's not just in my country, it's not across Europe, it is across the whole of the world. It's not from external armies mounding up on our borders this time, but it is from the corruption and the decay of our own institutions who are allowing this to happen. I think every one of us who's elected and represents our people, we need to remember that we are always the servants of the people. We are not their masters, and some of my colleagues and some elected representatives around the world have forgotten this lesson. They will need to learn this lesson again. We are entrusted to represent our constituents and their best interests at all times. And when their rights are threatened, we are duty bound to defend them. again, many of my colleagues seem to have forgotten that, and the turnout even for the WHO debate in our Parliament was very, very disappointing. So, the Global Pandemic Treaty is such a threat to our sovereignty, looming ominously on the horizon together with the amendments to the international health regulations, which will fundamentally, if they're passed through our parliaments, alter the relationship between the citizens and the state. The WHO would paint an illusion of nation states coming together to fight deadly pathogens, when it's really, as we've already heard, a power grab by an unaccountable elite, rather keen to reinforce the power shift that has already happened in the global pandemic response to COVID-19. The recommendations made during COVID-19 by the WHO were advisory, and they now want them to become mandatory. I mean, let's face it, the WHO did not exactly cover themselves with glory with their recommendations during the COVID-19 pandemic. It was a litany of disaster, a disaster which the WHO were not even keen to look into. They've had no review of their performance and their recommendations during the recent COVID-19 pandemic. So confident are they that their ideas and their advice was absolutely perfect. So there can be no doubt that if we fail to learn the mistakes of history, certainly that as far as the WHO are concerned, they are doomed to repeat them. So the World Health Organization is an unelected, diplomatically immune, tax-exempt group that bears no resemblance to the good faith Florence Nightingale Union of Nations set up over 75 years ago. Public health and the decisions surrounding it now exist as a monopoly of the WHO, headed up by bureaucrats in Geneva, whose leadership has been embroiled in scandal after scandal. And the majority of the influence on the WHO now is by external entities. And indeed, as has been mentioned, one of the richest men in the world has a massive influence over the WHO. Indeed, I think 84% of all the funding of the WHO now is by external commercial sources, with an ability to direct the area that your generous donations to the WHO will send their policies. So it's basically pay to play. If you have enough money, you can influence the WHO. Not exactly the people I'd like to be deciding in the future whether my constituents are locked into their houses, whether they can see their relatives, if they have to wear masks, and if they have to take mandatory medication. I would say the least qualified people in the world to make those decisions. And any parliament that decides to abdicate its responsibilities to its constituents does not deserve the name of being a parliament and does not deserve a seat in any elected assembly. We have no right to relinquish our sovereignty, the sovereignty of our nations, because it's not mine to give away. It's not any of us to give away. Sovereignty always belongs to the people, and every election should be returned back to the people, where they will again decide who they allow to represent them for the next parliamentary period. Forests can be grown for 1,000 years, but can be chopped down in a few weeks, and the same is with our democracy. I've actually been shocked. I think people in the UK have come to take our democracy and freedoms as a right, an entitlement, that's something that would never be taken away. But I'm equally shocked that those in Europe who have suffered under tyranny in living memory would, again, perhaps acquiesce to that position again without resistance. So I don't think I'm being dramatic when I say that the Global Pandemic Treaty and the amendments to the international health regulations will allow the WHO to declare a public health emergency of international concern, a FAKE, abbreviated to, and not only when to call it, but how long it would last and when it would be over. And I suspect that it would be a very long time before we had democracy returned to our independent parliaments. I call on every elected representative around the world to resist these WHO power grabs. It would be a dereliction of our democratic duty that we have to our electorates. There's no way that we should be signing away sovereignty without the agreement of the people, and that would take a referendum in each country to hand over those sort of powers, and I would settle for nothing less. I will end with a quote from America, which I think, since we've had Dr. McCullough on, I think is quite apt. It said that when the people are scared of the politicians, that is tyranny. But when the politicians are scared of the people, that's democracy. Ladies and gentlemen, we need to get to the latter, and we need to get there quickly. We're in dangerous times.
I'm actually wondering if I'm on the right panel now. As I look side to side, I think I feel a tad out of my depth. Before I crack on, I'd like to actually thank some other people in the room, and that is Oracle Films and Grit Media, who are live streaming for us today. Now, this live stream is going very well, and I just want to give those guys a round of applause for all the hard work they do. I am delighted to have the opportunity to speak here today. So firstly, thank you to the members of the European Parliament for welcoming us, and thank you to the citizens for your determination and perseverance, and for being the reason that we're all here today. My name's Fiona Hine, and I'm a campaigner and activist from the United Kingdom. I've dedicated the last 3 years of my life to the fight for truth, justice, and freedom. I'm going to warn you, I'm probably worse than you, Vicky, so I get a tad emotional as well. Yeah. Thank you. I never thought that I'd have the privilege to be speaking here today, and I'm honoured to be speaking alongside some of the strongest dissenting voices we have seen in the past 3 years. I'm also delighted to be here next to British MP Mr. Andrew Bridgen, who I've had the pleasure of working with, who's spoken at my rallies, and he is the only MP in the UK Parliament that's brave enough to stand with the people. I have a question, though. Are you scared of me?
I would never admit it if I was.
Exactly. I'll talk about a few things that all of you know. But from 2020, for 2 years, we all suffered draconian measures based on unscientific and fictional modelling. These measures were enforced by a tyrannical government that repeatedly claimed to be following the science. I think we can all agree they did not. They created a science designed to fit a narrative, while these unscientific measures, restrictions, and mandates were forced upon us. During this time, it was not easy to be a dissenting voice. Most of us were censored, silenced, and cancelled, but some of us were arrested, charged, and convicted for exercising our human right to peacefully protest against these cruel and harmful measures. We were isolated, terrorized, and oppressed, and this was their new normal. While dissenting voices were silenced and ridiculed, and people who peacefully demonstrated were criminalized, the masses were coerced and manipulated through the use of behavioral science, fear-mongering, and wartime propaganda. They were forced into taking an experimental vaccine, and this is their new normal. Most recently, I have run a 6-month-long campaign that gave a voice to the COVID vaccine injured and bereaved. Oh, sorry. Sorry. Thank you. So most recently, I've run a campaign for the COVID vaccine injured and bereaved. 2 of those ladies are in the room with us today, one who lost her mother and the other who's injured herself, who campaigned for truth and justice, not just for themselves, but for future vaccine injured, and we know that will come. I've campaigned for 2 years telling people that it would be safer to wait, that to discourage them from needlessly participating in an experiment. Unfortunately, today we see the results of a mass vaccination campaign rolled out globally with no informed consent. They mandated an experimental vaccine. They threatened people with the loss of their livelihoods. And now thousands of people in the UK alone have suffered life-changing injury, while others have been killed. This is their new normal. Our rights and freedoms were stripped from us in a way that we have never experienced before. The very people we may have once believed were democratically elected into their positions of privilege to govern by the people, for the people, committed fraud upon the people. I believe that today this fraud has been exposed. As Orwell said, all tyrannies rule through fraud and force, but once the fraud is exposed, they must rely exclusively on force. This power grab, as we know it, if we do not resist, will be that force, and that force will be our new normal. I stand with you today to congratulate these citizens for taking the first steps to tackle the transfer of power from the people to the unelected and unaccountable World Health Organization. Secondly, I'll call upon the citizens of the world to unite in their respective countries, as we will do in ours, and across all continents of the world, and to tell those citizens that you do have a choice. You have the power to effect change, and you have a voice, so use it. Now we must work together to stand against this power grab and at the very least raise mass awareness, encourage and demonstrate mass non-compliance. You have a choice not to choose their new normal. Thank you. Okay, again, all being well, we do have another message from financial analyst, I believe, Mr. David E. Martin, again from the USA.
To thank the members of the European Union Parliament. I am delighted to thank the members of the European Union Parliament, all of the people who have been calling for justice across Europe, and most importantly, the ECI coming together at this very important time to make sure that we take a step forward for humanity in the face of something that we need to put in a historical context. Most of you forget, but in 2000, in August of 2000, the United States Food and Drug Administration approved Bayer's ciprofloxacin drug for inhalation anthrax, a full year before anthrax was released by the Department of Defense in the United States, ultimately harming and killing people and creating a demand for a drug that 1 year earlier had been approved for a condition that had never been seen on Earth. We had not had inhalation anthrax, but the FDA approved it a year in advance. And 4 years later, 4 years after the US Department of Defense released anthrax into the US population, we passed the PrEP Act, which was the suspension of civil liberties and the suspension of constitutional rights in the United States in the case of a declared pandemic or an emergency authorization. Please, Europeans, please, global citizens, listen carefully to what I'm saying. The reason why we unleashed this thing called coronavirus was so that we could get to a place where the public would be willing to accept the suspension of civil liberties. As clearly articulated in the Charter of Fundamental Rights for the European Union, Article 3, Section 2A, we know that there is a requirement in Europe that says that under the preservation of bodily integrity, every person has the right to full informed consent. This born, ladies and gentlemen, out of the Nuremberg proceedings in 1945, this critical condition, which is a fundamental human right, is now being sought to be vacated by the same power grab that was done between 2001 and 2005 in the United States. Let me be abundantly clear. The ECI initiative is so critical because had US citizens stood up in 2002, 3, and 4, we would have been able to block the conditions that gave rise to the current pandemic. There would have been no emergency use. There would have been no compulsory medical countermeasure, and there would have been no reason for a pandemic to unleash terror across the population had we taken our voices seriously then. This is now your time. Stand with your members of parliament, stand with your fellow citizens, and make it abundantly clear that the World Health Organization will not have the authority to create the suspension of fundamental human rights now or ever, because the moment they take that power in their hands, they will abuse it no different from what we saw after the PrEP Act. We had this experience before. Our job is to learn from that experience and make it abundantly clear that as Bayer was the profiteer in 2001, and as Pfizer is the profiteer in 2022 and 2023, we cannot allow our rights to be suspended so that individual corporations and the governments that they patronize can be enriched at the expense of liberty. Stand together with me and with all of your colleagues and make it abundantly clear that this time we will not give a single ounce of effort against anything other than the total and 100% preservation of liberty. That is our cause. That is why we're here, and that is why I am honored to stand with you. Thank you.
Thanks, Fiona. Hello. My name is Gerald Hauser. I am a member of the Austrian Parliament and I represent the Freedom Party of Austria, the FPÖ. Together with Dr. Hannes Strasser, I wrote 2 bestsellers concerning the treatment of corona and the terrible corona policy in Austria. In Austria, we, the FPÖ, are the only party that challenged the corona policy of our government. For 3 years, we have argued that early medical treatment of corona patients, our plan B, would have been a better approach. We have said no to inhuman restrictions and no to experimental vaccination for the entire population. However, all other parties of the Austrian parliament have focused solely on vaccination. They have totally ignored the principle of informed consent. This is a no-go for us. On the basis of discrimination, with social pressure, and with disinformation, millions of Austrians were pushed into this risky vaccination program. The principle of informed consent and the right to the integrity of the individual was ignored. Currently, 2 significant legal projects are being prepared by the World Health Organization. The first is the Pandemic Treaty, and the second involves changes to the international health regulations. They will affect our constitution and our democracy profoundly. With these 2 legal instruments, as they call it, informed consent will begin. Whenever World Health Organization wishes to promote medical substances, there will be no right to the integrity of the individual. We are the only party discussing these issues which have never been debated in the national parliament. In addition, in the Austrian parliament, a motion was passed to gather digital health data from us. Again, the FPÖ was the only party that voted against this motion. This data will be shared with the European Health Data Space and may eventually be used worldwide. The European Union has a global plan to use this data across the world. They are collaborating with the World Health Organization. They are also about to establish the global digital health certificate. The worst-case scenario will be to introduce a mandatory vaccination. The European Citizens Initiative that is presented now is the first important step to say no. No to the violation of the integrity of the individual. Therefore, I would like to thank our 7 European citizens who today presented their European Citizen Initiative. We must send out a very strong signal to the world to protect ourselves and our liberties. Let's sign this initiative. Many thanks to all.
Thank you for having me. My name is Nathaniel Pawlowski from Canada. I'm going to speak about the consequences of abuse of power under the guise of health, set out by the WHO framework that local governments take upon themselves to implement. I'm the son of Pastor Artur Pawlowski, who you will hear in just a minute. I am here today in desperation, a cry for help. I would like to stand here and tell you all the things about freedom and democracy that I like, but I no longer know those things. They have been taken away from us Canadians. Canada has fallen. We no longer have freedom of religion or freedom of speech or the right to protest or assemble or associate or express ourselves or have free media or disagree with the government. Anyone who does so is arrested, charged, and jailed as political dissidents. My father was just found guilty of inciting mischief for giving a sermon to the truckers when they went and stood for our rights in 2022. A Christian sermon that referenced the solidarity movement was criminal in our government's eyes. A charge that has a penalty of up to 10 years in prison. This case sets a precedent to all Canadians and the world if you allow this to happen, that anybody, including politicians and media, do not have the freedom to say or express what they have on their hearts for fear that what they say is mischief and could be liable to prison. I myself have been charged for preaching and reading the Bible publicly because the government claims the Bible isn't inclusive and is hateful. This is what the Canadian government is doing to us. In my father's case, the Crown prosecutor, and I believe in naming names because our oppressors do not get away with this without being named and shamed. So the Crown prosecutor, Stephen Johnston, and Judge Gordon Crink claimed that when Pastor Artur, my father, referenced the solidarity movement in his 19-minute sermon, it was an act of mischief against the government. The very solidarity movement that this parliament reveres and has placards about all over the building. The peaceful movement that broke the Iron Curtain and repelled the communist hold on Europe. The movement the Canadian government condemns and says is unacceptable. So I ask you, the rest of the free world, to intercede on Canada's behalf and pressure the Canadian tyrants to stop persecuting law-abiding free Canadians, especially clergy. They simply did their duty and gave hope. My father told the truckers to stand for their rights, solidarity style, and to do so peacefully. His sentencing is this August 9th, 2023, and if he goes down, we are all lost as Canadians. If a pastor goes to prison, what can they do to the rest of us? For giving a sermon in Canada, they are no better than the tyrants of old. So please, I ask you for help and to pressure Canada on this matter and to help us deal with our oppressors who act like modern-day Caligulas. Trudeau is a modern-day Caligula. We cannot allow these mad emperors to run mad. And remember, all of this is being done under the guise of health, safety, and protecting us. By stripping our rights and ushering in tyranny, we must not allow Canada to treat its citizens, and especially clergy, this way. The WHO has structured a way to take away our rights, and our local governments are doing that. Now you will hear my father. He will speak via video. So this is Pastor Artur Pawlowski, political prisoner.
I am Artur Pawlowski, born behind the Iron Curtain in Poland, crushed by the iron fist of oppression.
The armed forces now rule in Poland with martial law and the threat of execution for those who break it.
Do wojskowej diktatury.
The horrors inflicted by unchecked despotism have burned their mark into my memory. The December of 1981, when martial law turned our cities into shadows. The biting winters, when the quest for bread met with empty shelves. The silenced voices of cutting forest. These memories led me to vow, never again would I bow to tyranny, never again would I let freedom's voice be muffled. This promise guided me to Canada, a beacon of liberty. You can keep it. I have a court order that says your actions are illegal. Back up, respect my rights. Freedom is more than a word. It's a measure of our humanity, courage, and determination. It's a cost borne by soldiers, journalists, and volunteers. We are providing necessities. When the shadow of tyranny found me again, denying me the right to serve the needy, disregarding its own rules, I remembered, never again.
After receiving new enforcement powers for public gatherings Thursday, Calgary police have arrested Artur and David Pawlowski.
Get out of this property. Immediately get out.
Premier of Alberta right now declared that protesting is illegal. So when I opened my church in the protest against the government overreach, I spent 3 days in jail for my crime of opening the church in a free and democratic society.
Like a soldier, I've tasted the bitter price of freedom, endured the cold handcuffs and harsh judgment. The soldier stands unflinching, knowing that freedom bears a cost. There is a price to pay. Like a journalist, I've dared to speak truth to power. My voice, not ink, reverberates through Calgary and beyond, fulfilling the duty of free speech. Like a volunteer, I've served my community with deeds, not mere words, knowing that true freedom lies in service to others. St. Augustine, a pillar of our Christian faith, said, hope has two beautiful daughters, anger and courage. Anger at the status quo, and courage to change it. From my house arrest, I pose this question to you, honorable members of the European Parliament. How many nights in cold cell would you endure for freedom? What lengths would you traverse to defend your people's rights? You see, I have spent 50 nights in jail standing up for our right to gather and worship. It's time to rise, to say never again, to face the lingering shadows of the 20th century, to challenge the injustice of today. It's in your best interest for people like me to survive. Because when we go down, be sure of it, you will be next.
I'm Nick Hudson, chairman of an organization called pandata.org, affectionately known as Panda. It was set up to push back against the travesties of the lockdowns in early 2020 and the general hysteria of the COVID phenomenon. Thank you to the MPs for organizing this. It's a pleasure to be back here. The inane banner, nobody is safe until everyone is safe, is doing much harm. Your money is being stolen for the benefit of corrupt companies and their stakeholders, and your freedom and the freedom of your children is being stolen by the effort to centralize this corruption at a global level. I come from Africa, and it suffers the most extreme example of how this fraud is being perpetrated. Africa has many problems. with a median life expectancy just above 60, clearly some of these problems relate to health. But the unrelenting obsession with viral diseases represents a scandalous misallocation of resources. Africa doesn't have lower life expectancy because of viruses. It has lower life expectancy because of poverty and malnutrition. Healthcare workers in Africa are so thinly spread that the average one is responsible for the care of thousands of people. Yet under the COVAX initiative, the African CDC has estimated that tens of billions of dollars needed to be spent vaccinating Africans against COVID. As my colleague Dr. David Bell points out, that wall of money ought to be viewed in the context of the World Health Organization's entire annual budget of $3 billion, and the Global Fund's aggregate annual global expenditure on malaria, tuberculosis, and HIV of about $4 billion. The wild lunacy of that ambition is even more vivid when we consider that most Africans have long been immune to COVID owing to prior exposure, and that only a tiny minority of them were at risk in the first place, owing to the very small portion of people in the older age groups in Africa. Trying to pass this madness off as some kind of equity simply won't cut it. And it is a very clear reflection of the sinister turn towards one-size-fits-all policies that the COVID policy response has exemplified, and which constructs such as One Health, global coordination in the name of pandemic preparedness, the WHO treaty, and most importantly, the international health regulation amendments are being weaponized. Before this peak vaccine sycophancy, we had the lockdowns. They were ineffective. They were contradicted by all preceding guidelines, and they were implemented without any sign of a cost-benefit analysis. Even if they worked in developed nations, and most surely they did not, in Africa, they were completely impractical. Attempts to implement them caused immense economic damage. Millions of people were hurled into grinding poverty. Entire cohorts of children had their educational prospects destroyed with absolutely no hope of recovery. The adage that lockdowns were a matter of lives versus the economy was always a completely silly one. Economies mediate life. Yet even as the WHO seeks to enlarge massively its powers and control in purported pandemic situations, it shows no sign whatsoever of acknowledging that the globally centralized responses of lockdowns and vaccination programs not only failed, but represented staggering misappropriation of resources. And make no mistake, it is your money that is being misappropriated, whether by direct taxes or the indirect ones from the implementation of so-called modern monetary theory. You are paying. Instead, the WHO shows every sign of wanting to do more of these programs. This is very clearly demonstrated by its obsession with vaccine passports and the central role that vaccines play in the One Health initiative. None of this is very far adrift from the commercial and political objectives of the so-called stakeholders who have infiltrated the WHO at every level in a coordinated effort of many years. We do well to take a step back from the narrow confine of pandemics to survey the broader context of our times. Pandemic preparedness is far from being the only agenda that drives towards centralization. I have a little rule of thumb for diagnosing a centralization scam. If we can detect 1, a propagandized global crisis, 2, admitting only global solutions, and 3, with dissenting voices viciously silenced, then we know with absolute certainty that we are dealing with a scam. And anyone who has been watching events of recent years with even a modicum of attention will be aware that multiple agendas tick these three boxes right now, not just the COVID agenda. The architects of such globalist trajectories, all the Kissingers, Rockefellers, Schwabs, Carneys, Strongs, Carstens, Bangas, are held out as great intellects, but they are nothing of the sort. We know, both in theory and in practice, that centralization causes nothing but misery because it destroys the mechanisms of error correction, leading to doubling down on flawed policies. And it cannot do otherwise, especially not in the highly centralized institutions that have been captured by these hubristic people. History is replete with examples of tyrants enamored of their centralizing visions, believing each time that they hold some perspective or some asset that their predecessors lacked. Today, it is the false belief that access to more data and bigger computers will mean that this time is different. But it isn't different. People still make mistakes, and when those who amass great power and control do so, the results are disastrous. Africans have found out the hard way how much centralized mistakes hurt, and they will mount a fight against this reiteration of colonialism. But citizens of all nations need to commit to fighting this tendency towards centralization at all levels and in all places. The entirety of our well-beings and freedoms is at stake. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I think we were going to have a Q&A, but I think we might go to the closing because we're rather tight on time. But I just wanted to make a final comment. We've had people travel from all over Europe to be here today. We've had a group come from Ireland, a group come from the UK. I know people from all over Europe have traveled to support you. Now, Nick's come all the way from South Africa just for this event, and we have Nathaniel that's come all the way from Canada. So can we please give a round of applause to the people that have traveled so far to be here today? And just lastly, before I wrap up and hand over to Mr. Kulukusic, I think the World Health Organization and those tyrannical dictators should be extremely worried about the people that we have together today in this room. For someone who has been waiting for someone like Andrew Bridgen to speak out in our own parliament and to be sat next to him and to be with MEPs, Christine, you're a hero. And you don't mince your words, and I think they should be very, very scared. So before we leave the podium, I do have one final request, because I do like things going viral, for want of a better word. But since I'm in charge of social media, would it be able to get the panelists and speakers all onto the podium, in front of the podium, and take a picture with all these global minds together today, citizens and professionals alike? Yes? Thank you.
Thank you. I think what we wanted to do is close because we are aware of time, but I believe that there were some people asked to put questions forward, so I'm not too sure if there's anybody else that wants to put questions forward. I think somebody there. Yes, please.
Hello, do you hear me? My name is Michael Sabo from United People Foundation. I just want to mention we need solutions, and we try to present with United People Foundation a solution to the problems we face with the people. So we develop, implement and promote innovative products and services from, for and by the people. This is our motto, the good stewardship of all life. And as a small step, we developed a financial system that is parallel to the existing fiat currencies, just like we have one in Switzerland, you know, the Vier, not many people know that, but this is a currency next to the existing Swiss franc, already 89 years. So this is a small step we present to the people of the world, from, for and by the people, to join that, perhaps that financial platform which can liberate us from the globalists who control all the finances in the world. Thank you for your attention.
There we go. Thank you for that. In regards to what you're saying, I think all of us, we agreed when we were approaching the subject of ECI that we wanted to include issues with the cash. I think we all are aware that the cash is being threatened, and we don't know exactly how soon this direction will be taken. At the moment, we did not include it because we are aware that the ECI is bound by specific rules that the European Commission has. But I think, yes, in the future, all of us, if we go forward, have to look into the issue of the cash.
Can I just, I would like to add just a few words. What I know, Slovakian parliament put the right to have a cash in the constitution, and when I wrote my plan 1 year ago, which is called Czech Republic on the first place, which is having some steps, this is one of the conditions. I think this is what we should push on, that the part of our constitutions will be the right to have cash and to make all the operation with cash.
Any solutions, as you ask, should come from us. So it's just the beginning. Together with the members of parliament, I think we have to find out the solutions. So when once an initiatives run, then the solutions will come. And the last one I have to say, this is the 20 Bulgarian sleva. Now our puppet government trying to taking out this slev from using it. And you know what? We have a referendum made with over 600,000 Bulgarian citizens signed down. The law said that the parliament must give us the date for referendum. They are running away from the commissions, and they do not want to put this proposition for decision to be voted inside. That's it. That's why. So the solutions will come with work. As French people are saying, the appetite comes with eating.
Yes. Oh, I think in the green shirt. Yeah. Sorry. And then the gentleman in the green shirt, and then the one that just stood up. If we could.
Hello. Ik spreek French. Sorry. Je pense que ça va être traduit après. Je pense ici que nous assistons de jours de prison aussi pour simplement m'être exprimé. Je vous remercie à tous.
Okay, Monsieur, thank you for your comment. It's very important that, of course, independent media, we all join forces. I will not answer now in French because my school French is too bad. I understood your core message. The thing is only that it is now, for now, if you would, and the others who have questions in their minds, would respect that we would love to answer questions regarding the ECI. And because this is now not a public forum, that we would love to have more often in the future, where people can bring in their questions, can bring in their initiatives. But for now, as we are running short in time, we would kindly ask you to, if you have a question to the ECI per se, ask those to us. Thank you.
Je vous remercie pour votre travail. Merci.
Thank you. Sorry, the gentleman in front.
My name is Olivier Chassagne. I'm just a citizen of Europe. It's high time that we coalesce all forces for one important step next year, which is the European elections, the European Parliament elections in June next year. It's high time that we coalesce all forces. We have to take contact each other so that we form the resistance. They play on the fragmentation of the dissidents. We should have only one dissident, one resistance. And we are the resistance. My question is simple to you. Are you ready to join forces?
We're going to ask Kladosław to answer. You want to answer? Okay. He says no. Okay. There we go. Vicky, here we go.
Yes, of course, we are ready to join forces because that's what we've been doing from the past almost 3 years. Myself and all these citizens, we've been in Fiona as well, we've been the resilience and resistance people that, though we don't look like it, but myself, I took thousands of people to the streets in Portugal. But the problem is, like in any other countries, is that the people, the majority of the people, that they are very worried to who is doing the good work. And then when they say, well, we are resistance, they are not. They become our own control opposition, and that has to end. Otherwise, the other side always win. So we have to realize there's always people that are going to be leading, and the other ones that are going to be follow the leaders. And until the people do not realize there's people with energy and the willingness to take the truth forward, these people, they cannot be saying they are resistant, because they are fighting against their own rights and freedom. Thank you very much.
Can I add something to that?
I think
Okay. Yes, I think the challenge we are facing is that we should become a group without becoming a mass ourselves. And a mass and a group are two things that are completely different. In a mass, everyone identifies and has to identify with a common ideal image. That's a characteristic of a mass. Everyone identifies with the same ideal image. And in a group, a fruitful group, a group that is constitutive for a human being, the one and only thing that unites the group is that everyone is encouraged to have his own opinion and to articulate his own opinion. And differences are encouraged between people. Differences between people, differences in opinion, or even the reason why people love each other. Because if you only love the other to the extent that he is similar to you, you love yourself and not the other. So, but I think that everything will depend on the degree to which we learn to cultivate and to practice the art of sincere speech, because it's sincere speech, resonating speech, that really connects people to each other, from an individual to an individual, and that really constitutes a group that does not become a mass. Because if we become a mass, we destroy ourselves. We will become aggressive, and we will be opposed to the other mass, the large mass, and we will be destroyed, inevitably.
I think if there's one more question, then please. So two, because the gentleman was holding a hand behind you, please.
One short question. My name is Rolf Karpenstein. My father worked for more than 30 years here in the Commission, so I grew up here in Brussels, know quite well, also worked for the legal service for 10 years. So my question is very simple. Is there any critical movement also within the Commission? I have one friend in the Commission. He is like me, critical on everything, understood everything. He says they're all asleep and following.
I think this isn't a question for us. It will be more to the MEPs, so maybe one of the MEPs can answer that.
Yes, if I could. There actually is, believe it or not. And this happened when we had our very first press conference, which was in September of 21, I think. We received lots of emails from the staff from EU Commission. And, well, I don't want to say too much, but it was very helpful having these contacts, because there were so many things that we had not even been aware of, and we were never supposed to be aware of any of this. We were made aware of, and that pretty much enabled us to take yet another step and the next step. So yes, there is. Unfortunately, it's obviously not among the level of the commissioners, but among the staff. Oh yes, there is lots of support. Yes.
Only a very short comment from my side. I want to take up a word from which I have learned from Philipp Kruse, and I think it's very important. We should, from this day on, now be all ambassadors of the idea we have just been discussing today. It's our duty to spread the word, and we need to address this to all the people in the parliaments all over Europe. I think it's very important that we create this critical group, people who are able and want to discuss this topic from now on. This is our duty, and we will start it today.
One last question, thank you, and then we will finish.
Greetings, colleagues. My name is Ralph Atrash. I'm a trainee in the Director General of Finance in the European Parliament. I don't represent the DG, I represent myself. And just it's funny how the leftists and the communists and socialists always accuse the right of being the tyrants and the fascists, but at the end, when they censor free will, it's just no one bats an eye. And by the way, Pastor, I just understand you and I feel you because I'm a Lebanese Christian from the East, and you haven't seen how in Syria and Iraq they burn Christians alive, they crucify them for not accepting the Muslim faith. Today, it's not Europe, it's not the case in Europe. But it will happen in Europe if you don't stop, if you don't take any measures against immigration. I want to live in a France that speaks French and drink wine, not in a halal eating France, and not the Islamic Republic in France. Thank you.
So we hear you, we understand you, and I think what is really important with all the stories and pointing out again to Pastor Pawlowski, and we have this international group of lawyers that said that they will be in contact with Pastor Arthur Pawlowski and help as best as they can, and we will globally raise more and more awareness. It's tragic what we hear from your country, but also, again, we want to point out that in this critical time, as we already heard, we are all ambassadors for this idea. And I think from now on, we need to, and Christina Andersen said that, you cannot comply your way out of tyranny. And we know that in the EU Commission, here in this Parliament, in the hospitals, wherever, in the supermarkets, there are employees, there are people working there who think the same, but who were just not brave enough till now to show their faces. And now is the time, if we really reach this critical percentage where we are as a group that respects each other, spread the word, people will be brave enough to speak up themselves.
I think we can increase our power in two ways, by a growing number and by a better quality of our own voice. That's two ways. And the one option, we cannot be sure that our number will increase, but we can make sure that we talk in a more powerful, a more pure, and an ever more a sincere way, I think. So I think we should realize that we don't need too many people to make the system change. We don't need too many people. We need a pure, resonating, pure and sincere speech. So we have it in our own hands.
I want to say something about fear and bravery. It's because I am afraid of losing my freedom and my human rights that I fight. It's because I'm afraid of do not be able to choose my health decisions and my children and my grandchildren. It's because I'm afraid that I have the courage. So to be afraid, it's okay, as long you deal with this fear to become a freedom fighter and do not bend towards the power, the people that think they hold the power. But I want to tell you and everyone, we are much more in numbers than the ones that think they own the world. That's why I'm here with no fear when people ask me, how come you have the courage? I don't. I have afraid. Thank you very much.
And I want to finish for myself this afternoon. I want to tell you that every long way, starting with the first small step, and finish with Nikos Kazantzakis' words, I don't want anything, I don't hope for anything, I'm free.
Okay, I was asked to answer the question, I didn't, but I have something to add. When I started to be activist 20 years ago, but when I started in this kind of field, I wrote a plan. And I said to people that it's not the group of people who is the powerful. Because if we have a powerful group of people, they always send an agents, the media are always shaming us, and they are always destroying the group. So it's not about the group, it's about the thought. This is why I wrote the thoughts, the plan, and I said to all the people that we have to stand behind the thoughts, behind the minds. This is what is the power. And one more thing, between me sitting in the bed when I said, let's do demonstration, and the guy who is standing on the stage with honorable members, for example, Christine Anderson and others, and in front 100,000 people, it's just the courage to stand behind the thoughts. And I think this is the power of what we have, stand behind the thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And once again, thank you for the MEPs that they gave us this opportunity to be here. And hopefully this will now spread with the hashtag Trust and Freedom. And we know we're already seeing people contacting us via our website and through the media. So really, we would really appreciate for everybody to share that and spread that information about the ECI and what happened here today. Thank you.